Welcome to Learning Goals, Performance Scales, and Tracking Student Progress. Today, we will be able to understand, define, and identify a learning goal. We will have a clear direction for establishing descriptions of levels of understanding and performance scales. And we will recognize the importance of student tracking in their own progress. First, learning goals. So what is a learning goal? Well, a learning goal is a statement of what students will know or be able to do over a course of a unit, in comparison to an activity or assignment. So activities and assignments are things students will be asked to do. They are critical to teaching, but not the goal itself. An example of activities would be things that students complete with guidance, and assignments are things that students complete independently. So let's look at an example. In science, a learning goal may be that students will be able to identify similarities and differences between various planets in the solar system. So an activity or an assignment to go along with that learning goal would be that if the students will watch a video on the characteristics of the planets, moon, and sun, students will take notes and list those characteristics of the planets, and then read page 24 through 32 and complete a graphic organizer. Alright, so let's play a game. 3 learning goals and an assignment. We're going to read each one of these statements and decide if it's a learning goal or an assignment. The first one, students will understand the defining characteristics of a democracy. This is a learning goal. Students will be able to tell time on an analog clock to the quarter hour. Also a learning goal. Students will solve 10 equations with one variable. This is an assignment. Students will be able to make valid inferences and draw conclusions based on data. This is a learning goal. Here are some different ways to display learning goals in your classroom. At this point, you may choose to play the learning goals, activities, and assignments game, or we can continue on. Performance scales. Looking at scales in your classroom, turn to a partner and discuss how you've used those scales in your classroom. So, let's rate your teaching experience so far this school year. Are you a 4? Family ties, everyone is getting along and happy. Are you a 3? Are you Olivia Pope in Scandal? Things work pretty well, but there's also some issues. Are you a 2? Reese Witherspoon in a little altercation with the police? Or are you a 1? Britney Spears during the bad years? So one of the issues that we always have with traditional rating scales is that sometimes when you're having difficulties, you don't want necessarily your peers to know that you're a 1, when truly in your heart of hearts you know that you are. So one way to fix that situation is that we will start using more of a performance goal activity. Here's another example that several teachers have used throughout the district, our Thunder Scale, where we use different Thunder players and the coach to describe their level of performance. So we're looking at academic scales versus check for understanding scales. Check for understanding scales, the scales that we've been using throughout the district, are non-specific. They communicate students' self-assessment of daily objectives or current activities or instructions. On the other hand, an academic scale is specific to the learning goal. It identifies levels of progressive complexity towards mastery of that learning goal. So we start out with simple content, move up to complex content of the learning goal, and then even more complex of that content. Here's an example of a simple scale. I'm an expert, I'm a practitioner, I'm an apprentice, or I'm a novice. Note that on the side of this scale, there are tiny mailboxes where students can be able to put their exit tickets when they leave their classroom. Here's an example of an academic scale. Notice the 3. I can identify and compare shapes based on their attributes. That is the learning goal. That is the standard, the requirement for that grade level. The 2, I can identify shapes based on their attributes, but have difficulty comparing shapes, a lesser complex skill. The 4 is I can explain how 2D or 3D shapes are alike and different based on their attributes, a more complex activity than the 3. Many times, performance scales or academic scales are then used to create performance-based grading. This is an example of an 8th grade classroom where the teacher used their performance scales to create a performance-based grading system. Now, this is not what the district is requiring. However, it's important to note that these are the possibilities to be able to use with performance scales. Here's another example of a simple scale, just the 1, 2, 3, 4 activity. Here's an example of a teacher who took their simple scale, the check for understanding scale with the 1, 2, 3, or 4, and converted it to a more academic scale. So they kept the numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, that's on your right hand side, but they used the chart to be able to slip in what the actual learning goal is and what a 4 would be and a 2 and a 1. So, how do you write a complex scale? Here's an example of a learning goal. The students will identify and explain the elements of plot structure, including exposition, setting, character development, problem resolution, and theme in a variety of fiction. For the 3, the students will be able to identify and explain. A 4 would be that the student will be able to analyze the impact of the plot on the outcome of the story. A 2, a lesser complex activity, would be that the students would just be able to define and understand the purpose for the plot. So as you can see, it's just a matter of changing the verb in many cases in that learning goal to make it a little more rigorous and a little less challenging. There's also an excellent Marzano proficiency bank that holds several different performance scales, and the website is listed here. It will require a login that you can create on your own. I will say that this performance bank is uploaded by teachers across the country, so it's very important that you look at the learning goal to ensure that it is aligned with Oklahoma standards, and that you also check to make sure that the scale fits your needs. Another helpful tool in writing performance scales is the depth of knowledge level. We can start with level 1, recall terms, and then move to with a little more rigor to level 2, looking at skill and concept. Level 3 or a 3 would be strategic thinking. So we could use many of those verbs that are there in that section to be able to create the level 3. And then the level 4. So this is the higher level of our performance scale. At this point, there is a write your own performance scale activity that you may choose to do in groups, or you may continue on. Now let's look at tracking student progress. In tracking student progress, the teacher facilitates the tracking of the student progress using a formative approach, and the students understand their level of performance on the scale. Here's a link to a Marzano video that's an excellent example of a teacher using the tracking student process method within their classroom. After watching the video, turn and talk to your neighbor about the activities you saw with that teacher in the tracking progress. Here are some examples of how you can be able to track student progress. The options are endless, and there are many, many different ways that you can be able to track the progress. The important thing to remember is the level of your students' understanding to make sure that it's developmentally appropriate for your students. Here are some additional examples. In these examples, the teacher took the learning goal and the performance scale and used that actual performance scale to track the progress. So each student has a paper clip with a different color ribbon, and students will move their paper clip up and down depending on where they believe they are on that performance scale. Similarly, next to this is another tracking progress that incorporated the more basic scale, using 1 counting down, 2 blasting off, 3 soaring over the rainbow, and 4 out of this world, and incorporated that with the performance scale. This example of student tracking is created using a smartboard. The students electronically move their status or their name once they have evidence of their learning. This example uses a pre, a mid, and a post to describe the student's progress. Notice that the bar is colored in to indicate their current status. At the secondary level, you can use tracking progress in the tracking notebook. At this time, take a moment to answer the following questions with your grade level teams. What method of progress monitoring is currently used? How is feedback used in response to the progress monitoring? And what role do you give your students in tracking their own progress? Finally, support, resources, and Q&A. We have a TLE website, the link is here below, where you can find many, many resources in relation to Marzano and your other TLE questions you may have. Here's the contact information for all of the members of our TLE team. And as always, keep calm and ask the TLE team questions.